Her ex took everything, but forgot the foundry her father hid in the deed. What she discovered inside that rusted metal shell wasn't just about reclaiming her life. It was about uncovering the man her father truly was and the legacy he died to protect. If you've ever felt like you've lost it all, hit that subscribe button. This story is for you. The key turned in the lock for the last time. It didn't feel real. None of it did. The click of the deadbolt sliding home was a sound of finality, a punctuation mark at the end of a sentence I never wanted to read. I stood on the porch of the apartment I had shared with Marcus for 3 years, holding a single cardboard box that contained the pieces of my life he'd deemed worthless enough to let me keep. An old university sweatshirt, a handful of paperbacks with cracked spines, a chipped coffee mug. The rest, the furniture we'd picked out together, the art we'd hung on the walls, the savings account I had poured my soul into, was gone. Legally his. A signature on a piece of paper I'd trusted him with had unraveled my entire world. The air was cold, one of those damp, biting November evenings that gets into your bones. It smelled like rain and defeat. I remember just standing there, watching my breath plume in the air, my knuckles white where I gripped the box. My phone buzzed in my pocket, a frantic vibration against my leg. It was probably my friend, Sarah, checking in again. I didn't have the energy to answer. What was there to say? It's official. I'm 22, homeless, and my entire net worth is in this box. It sounded like the opening line to a very bad, very unfunny joke. For 2 years, every paycheck from my job at the cafe had gone into that joint account. For 2 years, I'd listened to Marcus talk about our future, about building something solid, something real. He was the one with the business degree, the one who understood investments and legal structures. He'd set up a small company, put everything in its name for tax purposes, he'd said. He'd had me sign papers making him the sole director, a formality, he'd assured me, with a kiss to my forehead. It just makes the paperwork cleaner, Ilera. We're a team, I believed him. I believed in the team. And now, the team was dissolved, and he had the house, the car, the money. I had a box of memories and a lesson in trust so brutal it felt like a physical injury. I finally made myself move, walking down the 3 steps to the sidewalk. The streetlights flickered on, casting long, distorted shadows that seemed to mock me. I had nowhere to go. Sarah's couch was an option, but the thought of explaining the full, humiliating scope of my own stupidity was more than I could bear. I felt hollowed out, a shell of a person walking through a city that suddenly felt alien and hostile. I started walking with no destination in mind, just putting one foot in front of the other because staying still felt like admitting it was over. My phone buzzed again. This time I looked. An unknown number. Probably a debt collector Marcus had conveniently forgotten to pay. I almost ignored it, but something made me press the green button. Maybe I just wanted to hear a voice that wasn't one of the ghosts arguing in my head. Hello. My voice was a croak. Is this Ilera Vance? The voice on the other end was male, older, with a calm, professional cadence that was jarringly out of place with the chaos in my soul. Who's asking? I said, my tone sharper than I intended. My name is Arthur Davies. I was your father's solicitor. The words hit me like a physical blow. My father. He'd been gone for 5 years, a heart attack at 48 that had felt like the world tilting off its axis. He was a quiet man, a factory foreman who smelled of grease and sawdust, his hands permanently calloused. We weren't close, not in the way you see in movies. He was a man of few words, his love shown in repaired bicycle chains and perfectly sharpened pencils left on my desk before a big exam. After my mom left when I was a kid, it was just the 2 of us, moving through our small house in a sort of shared, silent grief. His death had left me truly alone, and the inheritance, a modest life insurance policy, was what had given me the seed money to start my life with Marcus. Money that was now gone. My father's lawyer? I repeated, confused. Why are you calling me now? Everything was settled years ago. Not quite everything, Ms. Vance, Mr. Davies said, his voice patient. I'm calling because of the property. The one in Blackwood Creek. I stopped walking. Blackwood Creek. The name was a ghost from a past I barely remembered. A small, forgotten town upstate where my father grew up. We'd visited my grandfather there once or twice when I was very young. All I could recall were tall pine trees and the smell of wood smoke. My father had inherited his parents' old place, a few acres of land with a run-down house on it. He'd never mentioned it much. I assumed he'd sold it. I don't understand, I said, leaning against a cold brick wall. The box in my arms felt impossibly heavy. Your father's will was specific, Mr. Davies explained. The house and the main parcel of land were left to you, and that was that. The deed was transferred into your name upon his death. I assume you included this asset in your recent business arrangements? He paused. I could hear the delicate legal dance in his words. He knew. He must have seen the public filings. My stomach twisted. Yes, I whispered. It was part of the company assets. Marcus, my ex-partner. It's all his now. The shame was a hot flush on my cheeks. There was a moment of silence on the line. I could hear the faint rustle of paper. I see, Mr. Davies said finally. Mr. Thorne. Is that his name? His solicitor contacted me last week to confirm the deed transfer. He was very thorough. He saw the main plot, the residential structure, the acreage. He dotted his I's and crossed his T's. So he took it all, I said, my voice flat. Thanks for the update. Not quite, Ms. Vance, the lawyer repeated, and this time there was a different note in his voice. A subtle edge of something that wasn't pity. It was intrigue. Your father was a very clever man. A bit eccentric, perhaps, but clever. He structured the deed in a very particular way. The main property is listed as Plot A, but there is a secondary industrial zone subsection on the original deed listed as Plot B. It was registered under a separate title number decades ago by your grandfather, and your father never amalgamated them. It's an old iron foundry. According to the town records, it's been derelict for 50 years. I was trying to process his words. Foundry. Plot B. It was legal jargon that meant nothing to me. What are you saying? I'm saying, Mr. Davies said, his voice becoming clearer, more direct, that Mr. Thorne and his solicitor took Plot A. The house, the fields, the 2 acres it sits on. They missed Plot B. It's a quarter-acre parcel landlocked within the main property, but with its own title. It's a stone building, a relic. According to the deed, it's still yours. He took the house, Ms. Vance, but he forgot the foundry. I stood there on that cold city sidewalk, the sounds of traffic and sirens fading into a dull roar. In my arms, the box of my discarded life. In my ear, the voice of a stranger telling me that in the middle of the wreckage, there was one single, rusted, forgotten thing left. A derelict foundry in a town I couldn't place on a map. It wasn't a home. It wasn't money. It was a ghost, a piece of my father I never knew existed. And for some reason, in that moment of absolute desolation, it felt like the first glimmer of light in a very, very long tunnel. It was mine. It was the one thing Marcus hadn't been clever enough to take. The bus ride to Blackwood Creek felt like a journey to another planet. I'd spent the last of my cash on the one-way ticket, leaving me with a grand total of $17 and some change. Sarah had pressed a 50 into my hand at the station, her eyes full of worry. Are you sure about this, Alara? A broken-down factory? What are you going to do? I didn't have an answer. All I knew was that I couldn't stay on her couch forever, a living ghost in her apartment, a constant reminder of my own failure. Going north, to this place I barely remembered, felt like the only form of forward motion I had left. The city's concrete and glass slowly gave way to sprawling suburbs, then to wide, open farmland, and finally to the dense, rolling hills of the North Country. The trees grew taller, thicker, their branches skeletal against a slate-gray sky. We passed through small towns with names like Hope's End and Miller's Crossing, each one a collection of tired-looking clapboard houses and a single blinking traffic light. I watched the world go by through the grimy window, my reflection a pale, translucent mask over the passing landscape. I tried to remember my father in this context. Did he take this same bus when he was a boy? Did he look out at these same trees? The man I knew was a city man, a creature of routine and factory shifts. The idea of him belonging to this quiet, rural world felt dissonant. He never spoke of his childhood, of his parents. It was a locked room in his life, and I'd never had the courage to ask for the key. Now, it seemed, he'd left one for me after all. The bus hissed to a stop at a crossroads marked by a single, weathered sign that read Blackwood Creek. There was no station, just a gravel shoulder and a wooden bench. The driver grunted, "This is you," and I grabbed my backpack and the same sad cardboard box and stepped out into the biting wind. The bus pulled away with a groan of gears, leaving me in a profound and intimidating silence. The air was different here. It was clean, sharp, and smelled of pine needles and damp earth. The only sounds were the wind rustling through the high branches of the evergreens and the distant caw of a crow. I stood for a moment, just breathing it in, feeling the cold seep into my thin jacket. According to the map Mr. Davies had emailed me, the property was about a mile down the main road. 1 mile to the only thing in the world that was still mine. The walk was cold, but it was also beautiful in a stark, melancholy way. The road was lined with ancient stone walls, crumbling in places, covered in moss. The trees formed a canopy overhead, the late afternoon light filtering through in dusty shafts. There were no other people, no other cars. It was just me and the road. My mind, which had been a relentless storm of anger and regret for days, slowly began to quiet down. The sheer scale of the wilderness around me made my own problems feel smaller, less consuming. Marcus and his betrayal felt like a story from another lifetime, a drama played out on a tiny, distant stage. After about 20 minutes, I saw it. A rusted mailbox, half hidden by overgrown bushes, with the name Vance barely legible beneath a layer of grime. A dirt driveway, more like 2 muddy ruts in the grass, curved away from the road and disappeared into the trees. This was it. I took a deep breath and turned onto the path. The driveway opened into a clearing, and my heart sank. The house was worse than I had imagined. It was a small 2-story farmhouse, but its paint was peeling in long, curling strips like sunburnt skin. Several windows were boarded up, and one of the porch steps was completely rotted through. A thicket of thorny bushes had grown up against the front of the house, half swallowing the door. This was Plot A, the part Marcus now owned. A bitter smile touched my lips. Good luck with that, I thought. But my eyes were drawn past the house to the structure looming behind it. Set back another 100 yards, at the edge of the clearing where the forest began again, was the Foundry. It was enormous, far bigger than I'd pictured. It was a long, rectangular building made of dark, soot-stained stone, with a high-pitched roof of corrugated metal that was bleeding rust in long, orange streaks. A massive brick chimney rose from one end, stark and black against the gray sky. It looked less like a building and more like a tomb, a sleeping iron giant from a forgotten age. It was intimidating, ugly, and strangely magnificent. That was Plot B. That was mine. I skirted the dilapidated house, my sneakers sinking into the wet ground. The air grew colder as I approached the Foundry. Its stone walls seemed to radiate a deep, ancient chill. A massive set of sliding doors, made of thick, riveted steel, were chained and padlocked. They looked like they hadn't been opened in a lifetime. I walked the perimeter, my hand trailing along the rough, cold stone. Weeds grew thick and high around the foundation. A few small, high windows, caked with decades of grime, were dark and impenetrable. There was a smaller, regular-sized door on the side of the building, also chained shut. The lock was an old, heavy thing, a solid block of rusted iron. Mr. Davies had sent me a small package via courier before I left. Inside was a single, heavy, old-fashioned iron key. He'd said it was found in a safe deposit box of my father's, labeled with the property's address. I have no idea if it still works, he'd warned. It's a long shot. My fingers were numb with cold as I fumbled with the key. It slid into the lock with a grating screech. I held my breath and turned. For a moment, nothing happened. The key wouldn't budge. I put my other hand on it, using all my strength, leaning my body weight into it. There was a horrible, groaning crack from inside the lock's mechanism, a sound of metal surrendering after a long fight. The shackle popped open. The chain fell to the ground with a heavy clatter that echoed in the silence. I pulled on the thick iron handle of the door. It resisted, metal scraping against its frame. I pulled harder, my feet sliding in the mud, and with a final, agonized shriek of protest, the door swung inward into darkness. A wave of air washed over me from the black interior. It was an ancient smell, a smell of cold metal, cold dust, and time itself. It was the smell of a place that had been sealed for generations. I stood on the threshold, my heart pounding in my chest. I had no idea what I was doing here, or what I would find inside. But I had come this far. I took my phone out of my pocket, turned on its small flashlight, and stepped across the threshold, out of the dying light of the afternoon and into the belly of the beast. The darkness swallowed me whole. The beam from my phone's flashlight cut a weak, trembling path through the cavernous dark. The air inside was thick and still, so cold it felt solid. My first impression was of scale. The space was immense, like the inside of a cathedral dedicated to some forgotten industrial god. The ceiling soared high above me, lost in the gloom, supported by massive iron beams that crisscrossed in the darkness like the ribs of a leviathan. My light played over mountains of shadow that resolved into shapes as I moved closer. Hulking, silent machinery covered in thick shrouds of dust and cobwebs. A massive furnace, its brick mouth gaping open and cold. Anvil stands, casting presses, and a network of overhead cranes, their hooks dangling like gallows in the stillness. Everything was coated in the same fine, gray powder, a combination of dust, rust, and time. It was a graveyard of industry. I walked deeper into the building, my footsteps echoing unervingly in the vast space. The floor was concrete, cracked, and uneven in places. I had to step carefully over discarded tools, piles of metal slag, and things I couldn't identify, shapes lost to rust and decay. The beam of my light caught something on a far wall, faded, painted letters. Blackwood Creek Forge and Foundry. EST 1919-inch, my great-grandfather's business. A place my father had never once mentioned. Why? Why hide this piece of our family's history? It felt like trespassing, like walking through someone else's tomb. There was a profound sense of abandonment here, but something else too. A feeling of latent power, of potential energy held in suspension. I could almost hear the ghosts of the past, the roar of the furnace, the clang of hammers on steel, the shouts of men. Now, there was only silence. Near the back of the main hall, I found a small partitioned-off area. A foreman's office, maybe. The door hung crookedly on one hinge. I pushed it open and shone my light inside. There was a simple wooden desk, a single chair, and shelves filled with rotting ledgers. The desk was covered in a layer of grime, so thick I could draw a line in it with my finger. Everything seemed to have been left in a hurry, abandoned mid-task. A calendar on the wall was turned to August 1973. I ran my light over the desk. Underneath the filth, I saw something. Not a ledger or a tool, but a metal box. It was an old military-style ammunition can, painted olive drab, with a heavy latch on the front. It seemed out of place, newer than everything else in the room. There was a single word stenciled on the top in white paint: Ilera. My breath caught in my throat. I wiped the dust away with the sleeve of my jacket. There was no mistake. My name. My father had put this here for me. My hands trembled as I reached for the latch. It wasn't locked. I lifted the lid, a faint squeak of metal protesting the movement. Inside, resting on a bed of yellowed cloth, was a thick manila envelope sealed with wax. And on top of the envelope, a single, folded piece of paper. I picked it up. The paper was crisp, not old and brittle like the ledgers. It was a note. The handwriting was my father's, a familiar, blocky, left-handed scrawl that I hadn't seen in 5 years. My eyes filled with tears before I even read the words. It was a message from the past, a voice from beyond the grave. I unfolded the paper carefully. "My Sparrow," it began. His nickname for me when I was little. I hadn't heard it since I was 10. If you are reading this, it means a few things have happened. It means I am gone, and it means you have found your way back here, to this place. I am sorry for the silence. I am sorry for the secrets. There wasn't an easy way to tell you any of this. I hope you can find it in your heart to forgive me. This place, this foundry, it is not what it seems. It is not just a relic. It is your inheritance. Not the money, not the house. The house was always a decoy. I knew that one day, people might come looking for what I had, and I wanted them to take the wrong thing. It seems I was right to worry. Inside the envelope is the real story. Read it, understand it, and then the choice will be yours. Be careful, Ilera. The world is full of men who will take everything you build if you let them. I should know. Don't be like your old man. Be smarter. Be stronger. Love, Dad. I sank into the dusty old chair, the note shaking in my hand. My body was racked with sobs, deep, gut-wrenching sobs for the father I missed, for the man I was only just beginning to meet. The grief I had suppressed for 5 years came rushing to the surface, raw and overwhelming. I cried for the little girl who had lost her dad, and for the young woman who had just found him again, here in this cold, dark room. He had known. Somehow, he had anticipated a situation like the one with Marcus. The world is full of men who will take everything you build. The words were a direct echo of my own life, a warning sent across time. He had built a fortress to protect his legacy, and a decoy to fool the invaders. And I just walked through the gates. After a long time, my tears subsided, leaving me feeling empty and strangely calm. The last of the daylight was gone. The only light in the world was the small, battery-powered circle from my phone. I looked at the thick envelope in the box. The real story. I took a deep, steadying breath, broke the wax seal, and pulled out a stack of papers several inches thick. The top page was another letter, this one many pages long, filled with his dense, deliberate script. I angled my phone to get the best light, and I began to read. Dear Ilera, the letter began. I was never a factory foreman. Well, that's not entirely true. I worked in factories for a while, to learn, but it was never who I was. Your grandfather and his father before him, they were blacksmiths, iron workers. They made tools, plows, gates, practical things, strong things. They built this foundry with their bare hands. But I was never interested in making plows. I was interested in making art. The word stunned me. My father, an artist? The quiet, pragmatic man who fixed things and never wasted a word? It seemed impossible. I read on, my world shifting with every sentence. He wrote about his secret life. After his shifts at the main factory in the city, he would come here to the old family foundry. He hadn't fired up the main furnace. It was too big, too loud. Instead, he had built a smaller, modern workshop for himself in a sectioned-off part of the building. He wasn't a blacksmith. He was a sculptor. He worked with metal, creating intricate, beautiful things. He described his process, the way he could see the shape of a sculpture hidden inside a raw block of steel, the way the heat and the hammer were his true language. He had become successful in a quiet, underground way. He sold his pieces to private collectors under a pseudonym. He never wanted fame. He just wanted to create. He wrote about the joy it brought him, a joy I had never once seen on his face. He had lived a double life, and I, his own daughter, had only ever known the mask. Then the letter turned darker. I had a partner once, he wrote, a man named Julian Croft. He wasn't an artist, but he was a businessman. He handled the sales, the clients. He was charming, convincing. I trusted him. I thought we were a team. My blood ran cold. The same words. The exact same words Marcus had used. Julian saw my work not as art, but as a commodity. He wanted to scale up, to mass-produce the designs, to turn the foundry into a factory pumping out cheap copies for hotels and corporate lobbies. He wanted to take the soul out of it and replace it with a balance sheet. When I refused, he tried to take it all. He used the law, used contracts I had signed without reading the fine print. He tried to claim ownership of my designs, of this very building. The parallel was so exact, so chilling, it felt like my father was describing my life with Marcus. He had lived through the same betrayal. I fought him. The letter continued. It took years. It cost me everything. It cost me your mother. She couldn't handle the stress, the fight, the secrecy. She wanted a normal life, and I couldn't give it to her. When she left, I was broken. I shut this place down. I hid my work, locked the doors, and walked away. I took the foreman job in the city to be near you, to give you a stable life. I buried the artist. I buried myself. I did it to protect you, Sparrow. I didn't want you to grow up in the shadow of that fight. I wanted you to be safe. I had to stop reading. My head was spinning. The story of my childhood, the story I had always told myself, of a quiet, simple father and a mother who had simply left, was a lie. It was a cover story. My father wasn't a simple man. He was a brilliant, wounded artist who had sacrificed his entire identity for me. The abandonment I'd felt from my mother, the emotional distance from my father, it was all collateral damage from a war I never knew he was fighting. He had built a wall around his heart and around this foundry to keep the Julian Crofts of the world out. And in doing so, he had locked me out too. He thought he was protecting me from his past, but he had also shielded me from the most beautiful, vital part of who he was. I sat there in the crushing silence of the foundry, the letter in my lap, the beam of my phone starting to dim. The weight of it all was immense. This place wasn't just a derelict building. It was a legacy. It was a warning. And it was a burden. What was I supposed to do with this? Honor a ghost? Refight a battle that had destroyed him. My phone buzzed, its battery warning flashing on the screen. It was Sarah. I ignored the call. I leaned forward, resting my forehead on the cold, dusty metal of the ammunition box that bore my name. The simple option was to call a scrap dealer. The land was probably worth something, even as a landlocked parcel. The machinery was tons of raw metal. I could sell it all, take the money, and disappear. Start over somewhere new, somewhere Marcus could never find me. It would be easy. It would be an escape. But as I sat there, I could feel the weight of my father's words. Don't be like your old man. Be smarter. Be stronger. He hadn't given up because he was weak. He'd made a strategic retreat. He'd hidden his most valuable asset, waiting for a time when it could be brought back into the light. He had left the choice to me, to run or to stand and fight, to let his legacy rust into oblivion, or to pick up the hammer he had been forced to lay down. I didn't know if I had it in me. I was not a fighter. I was the girl who had been tricked out of her life savings. I was the girl currently sitting in a dark, freezing ruin with $17 to her name. But I was also my father's daughter. And for the first time, I was starting to understand what that meant. Listen, if you've made it this far into my story, you've probably been through something similar. Maybe not a literal hidden foundry, but a moment where you felt completely wiped out, where everything you thought was solid turned to dust. A moment where you had to choose between giving up and digging deeper than you ever thought you could. If that's you, I want you to know you're not alone. This community we're building here is for people like us, people who have seen the worst and are trying to build something better. So take a second, hit that like button, and if you feel comfortable, share a little piece of your own story in the comments. What was the foundry you discovered when you thought all was lost? I promise you, I read every single one. Your story matters. Now let's get back to that cold, dark office. My phone finally died, plunging me into absolute blackness. The kind of profound, disorienting dark you only find far away from city lights. For a moment, panic seized me. I was alone, in a massive, unfamiliar building, with no light and no way to call for help. The silence pressed in, no longer peaceful, but menacing. Every creak of the old building, every rustle of wind outside, sounded like a threat. I forced myself to breathe. In out. My father had spent countless hours in this building. My grandfather was born in this town. This place was in my blood. It wasn't alien. It was home, or the closest thing to it I had left. I stood up slowly, my hands outstretched, and felt my way out of the small office and back into the main cavern of the foundry. Without the focus beam of my phone, the space felt different. My eyes slowly adjusted, and I began to see shapes in the faint moonlight filtering through the grimy upper windows. The hulking machines became silent sentinels, guardians of this place. The darkness wasn't empty, it was just resting. I spent the night huddled in a corner of the office, wrapped in my thin jacket, the cardboard box as a pillow. Sleep was impossible. My mind raced, replaying my father's words, picturing the life he had described. An artist, living a secret life, betrayed by a man he trusted. It was a story of profound loneliness. and I realized that his quietness, his emotional distance, wasn't a lack of love. It was a shield. He was protecting himself and me from a world that had tried to break him. When the first hint of dawn crept through the dirty windows, painting the interior in pale, ghostly stripes of gray light, I felt a shift inside me. The fear and despair of the previous day had been burned away by the cold and the long, dark night of the soul. In its place was a tiny, fragile ember of something new. Resolve. I left the foundry and walked back out into the crisp morning air. The world felt fresh, washed clean. I looked at the dilapidated farmhouse that Marcus now owned, and I felt nothing but a distant pity for him. He had taken a shell, the decoy. He had no idea that the real treasure was a few hundred feet away, a place he was too blind to see. My father's letter had mentioned a second part. The rest of what you need to know is in the workshop, he had written. Behind the forge. Look for the loose stone. I went back inside, the daylight making the foundry feel less like a tomb and more like a museum. I could see the details now, the intricate ironwork on the support beams, the sheer size of the flywheels and gears. It was a marvel of old-world engineering. At the far end of the main hall, behind the massive, cold brick furnace, I found what he was talking about. A section of the stone wall was newer, the mortar a slightly different color. I pushed on the stones, running my hands over them, until one of them shifted under my palm. It was heavy, but I managed to pry it loose. Behind it was a dark cavity, and inside, a heavy iron ring. I pulled on it, and a section of the wall swung inward with a low groan, revealing a hidden doorway. I stepped through and found myself in a different world. This was not the 1970s relic outside. This was my father's secret heart. It was a modern workshop, maybe 30 feet square, meticulously organized. There were welding tanks, plasma cutters, power hammers, and rows upon rows of hand tools, all hanging neatly on pegboards. It was dusty, but it was not derelict. It looked as though he had just stepped out for a moment. On a large workbench in the center of the room sat a sculpture, half-finished. It was an abstract piece, a swirl of steel and bronze that looked like a bird taking flight. It was breathtakingly beautiful, full of motion and grace. This was what my father did. This was who he was. And on the workbench, next to the sculpture, was another ammunition can. This one was smaller. Inside was another sealed envelope and a set of keys. I opened the letter. Alara, this one read, if you found this place, it means you chose not to run. I'm proud of you. This was my sanctuary. Everything in here is what I used to create my work. But the work itself is not the most valuable thing I left you. The real secret is in the process. He went on to explain that he had spent years perfecting a unique alloy, a blend of steel, nickel, and a few other trace elements that was incredibly strong, yet lightweight and resistant to corrosion. He'd also developed a special forging technique, a way of heat-treating the metal that gave it an iridescent, almost living patina. It was a secret he had never shared with anyone, not even Julian Croft. Croft could steal my designs, he wrote, but he could never replicate the material. That was my insurance policy. The formulas, the heating charts, the chemical compositions, they are my real legacy. They are in the safe. The keys are in this box. The safe is beneath the floorboards under this bench. He was right. A section of the wooden floor was loose. I pried it up, and there, set in the concrete below, was a small black floor safe. One of the keys from a box fit the lock. I turned it, pulled the heavy door open, and looked inside. It was filled with notebooks. Dozens of them. They were filled with his handwriting, with chemical equations, with temperature charts, with detailed sketches and blueprints for sculptures I could barely imagine. This was his life's work. His genius, codified in ink on paper. This was what Julian Croft had tried to steal. This was what he had given up everything to protect. As I was pulling the last notebook out, my phone, which I'd managed to charge slightly using an old solar-powered lamp I found in the workshop, rang. It was an unknown number, but it wasn't Mr. Davies. I answered, my voice wary. Am I speaking with the owner of the property at 141 Blackwood Road? The voice was slick, professional, the kind of voice that offers you a timeshare in Florida. "Who is this?" I asked. "My name is Rick Peterson from Peterson Development. We've recently acquired the adjacent agricultural property, and we're looking to consolidate the parcels for a new housing development. Your plot, the old Foundry, is right in the middle of our proposed layout. Frankly, it's an eyesore and a liability. We'd be willing to take it off your hands. Clear the land for you. I can offer you $50,000. Cash. $50,000. The number hung in the air. 2 days ago, that would have sounded like a lottery win. It would have been a plane ticket to a new life. It would have been an escape. I knew instantly where this had come from. Marcus. He must have discovered his oversight, realized he didn't own the whole property, and, in a final act of spite, tipped off a developer to try and squeeze me out. He was trying to bury my father's legacy under a row of identical suburban houses. "It's a generous offer," the man said, his voice oozing condescension. "It's more than a pile of scrap metal is worth. You should take it." I looked around the workshop. I looked at the beautiful, unfinished sculpture on the bench. I looked at the pile of notebooks at my feet, the sum of my father's hidden life. $50,000 to erase it all. To let a man like Rick Peterson, and by extension a man like Marcus, win. My father's words echoed in my head. Be smarter. Be stronger. He had retreated, but he had never surrendered. He had left the final battle to me. I held the phone to my ear and felt a lifetime of self-doubt fall away. I was no longer the victim. I was no longer the girl who trusted the wrong man. I was Alara Vance, daughter of a secret genius, and this was my ground. This was my fight. "Mr. Peterson," I said, and my voice was clear and steady, a voice I didn't recognize as my own. "Thank you for your offer, but this property is not for sale. Not for $50,000 and not for $50 million. This isn't a pile of scrap metal. It's a foundry, and I have work to do." I hung up the phone before he could reply. The silence that followed was different. It wasn't empty. It was filled with purpose. I picked up one of my father's notebooks, opened it to the first page, and began to read. The real work was just beginning. The first call I made after hanging up on the developer was to Mr. Davies. I explained everything I had found, the letters, the hidden workshop, the notebooks full of formulas and designs. I read him passages from my father's letters over the phone. He was silent for a long time, the only sound the faint static on the line. When he finally spoke, his usual calm, professional tone was gone. In its place was a note of genuine awe. "My word," he said softly. "I knew your father was a private man, Miss Vance, but this is extraordinary. He wasn't just an artist. He was an inventor. These formulas, these designs, this is intellectual property. Potentially very valuable intellectual property. What does that mean legally?" I asked, pacing the floor of the workshop. "It means that you don't just own a building, you own a body of work. We need to secure it immediately. I'll start the process of copyrighting the designs and patenting the alloy formulas in your name. We need to create a legal fortress around this legacy, just as your father created a physical one-inch." He paused. "This Julian Croft he mentioned, I'll look into him. If he's still in the art world, we need to know." Hearing him talk, hearing him use words like patenting and copywriting, made it all feel real. This wasn't just a family secret anymore. It was a tangible asset. My father had left me more than just a warning. He had left me ammunition. The next few weeks were a blur of activity. Mr. Davies worked tirelessly on the legal front, filing paperwork, creating a trust to hold the intellectual property, and building the legal wall he'd promised. Meanwhile, I had a more fundamental problem: survival. I still had almost no money, and the Foundry, for all its potential, was a cold, dark, and uninhabitable place. The first step was power. I found a main breaker box, a huge, archaic panel of levers and fuses. Following my father's meticulous notes in one of the journals, I was able to figure out the system. He had disconnected the Foundry from the town's grid years ago, but had installed a massive diesel generator as a backup. It hadn't been run in years. I spent a whole day cleaning it, checking the fuel lines, and changing the oil, learning from a tattered manual I found on a shelf. When I finally turned the key, it sputtered, coughed black smoke, and then roared to life with a deafening shudder. One by one, I flipped the breakers. Old fluorescent lights flickered on overhead, illuminating the vast main hall in a sterile, buzzing glow. For the first time, I could see the foundry in its entirety, not as a place of shadows, but as a place of work. The dust was still thick, the rust was still there, but with the lights on, it felt alive again. The workshop, with its more modern wiring, lit up brightly, a beacon of purpose in the heart of the old building. My days fell into a rhythm. I'd spend the mornings on the phone with Mr. Davies or doing research on my laptop, which I charged off the generator. The afternoons and evenings were for physical labor. I started with the workshop. I cleaned every tool, every surface, every inch of the space until it gleamed. I was washing away the dust of my father's grief, preparing the space for a new beginning. It was backbreaking work, but it was honest. Every muscle ache, every grease stain on my hands felt like a victory. To eat, I had to venture into the town of Blackwood Creek. It was a small, tight-knit community. My presence, a young woman living alone in the old Vance Foundry, was a source of considerable curiosity. The town's hub was a combined general store and post office, run by a woman named Martha, whose sharp eyes missed nothing. "You're Tom Vance's girl, aren't you?" she asked me the first time I went in, her voice not unkind. "Yes," I said, surprised she remembered him. "We all thought this place would fall down before anyone ever came back to it," she said, ringing up my small basket of groceries. "Your father was a good man. Quiet. Kept to himself after his folks passed. What are you planning on doing with that old place?" "I'm figuring that out," I said, which was the honest truth. The other crucial stop was the hardware store, a place that seemed as old as the foundry itself, smelling of sawdust and machine oil. It was run by a man named George, who must have been in his late 70s, with hands as calloused as I remember my father's being. "Need to fix up the old place," he said, looking over my list of cleaning supplies and basic tools. He squinted at me. "You've got your father's eyes." He told me he remembered my dad as a teenager, always tinkering, always building things. He had a gift with his hands, George said, a sad smile on his face. A real artist with metal. Shame he ended up in a city factory. I didn't correct him. I just nodded, a lump forming in my throat. These people held small, forgotten pieces of my father, and sharing them felt like they were helping me put him back together. One afternoon, a young man came into the foundry. He couldn't have been much older than me, with grease-stained jeans and a curious expression. "Heard the generator running," he said, standing in the massive doorway. "I'm Liam. I'm a welder. Heard you were trying to get the old Vance place running again." I was wary at first, but he seemed genuine. He was fascinated by the old equipment, his eyes wide as he looked at the massive casting press. "They don't make them like this anymore," he said, running a hand over the cold steel. "This is real American iron." Liam started stopping by after his shifts at a garage in a neighboring town. He'd bring coffee, and we'd talk. He helped me figure out some of the more complex machinery, and in return, I showed him my father's notebooks. He was blown away by the alloy formulas and the intricate designs. "Your dad was a genius," he said one evening, looking at a blueprint for a complex, gear-driven kinetic sculpture. "This is next-level stuff. You could build this. We could build this." The idea was terrifying and exhilarating. Me? A builder? An artist? I'd only ever served coffee and trusted the wrong man. But as I spent more and more time in the workshop, surrounded by my father's tools and his spirit, something inside me started to shift. I found his old work gloves. They were stiff and worn, but when I put them on, they fit perfectly. I picked up a hammer. It felt balanced in my hand, natural. I started small. Using the instructions in his notebooks, I fired up the small electric forge in the workshop. I took a piece of scrap steel and began to hammer it, trying to replicate the basic techniques he described. My first attempts were clumsy, ugly. I burned myself twice, but I didn't stop. I was clumsy and frustrated, but I was not defeated. With every strike of the hammer, I felt a connection to him. I was speaking the language he had been forced to abandon. I was learning the grammar of his soul. It was no longer about revenge against Marcus, or even about the money. It was about legacy. It was about taking this beautiful, broken thing my father had left me and breathing life back into it. It was about finishing the work he never could. Months passed. The harsh winter gave way to a tentative spring. The snow melted, and the woods around the foundry came alive with green. My life had found a new, quiet rhythm. The legal battlements were in place, thanks to Mr. Davies. The intellectual property was protected. He had also discovered that Julian Croft had passed away years ago, but his son had inherited his art dealership, a slick, high-end gallery in the city, a place that specialized in large-scale metal sculptures for corporate clients. The enemy had a new face. But I wasn't ready for that fight yet. I was still learning. Liam became a regular fixture at the foundry, a partner in the slow, painstaking process of restoration. Together, we managed to get one of the smaller casting furnaces working. The first time we successfully poured molten metal, my father's unique alloy, mixed according to his precise formula. It felt like a miracle. The glowing, liquid steel was mesmerizing, a river of captured starlight. We poured it into a simple mold I had made, a small, abstract bird, a nod to the sculpture he'd left unfinished. When it cooled and I broke the cast, I held the finished piece in my hand. It was heavier than it looked, and the surface shimmered with that iridescent patina he had described. It was beautiful. It was real. I had made something from his mind with my own two hands. I started selling small pieces online, simple designs based on his early sketches. Just enough to pay for fuel for the generator, for groceries, for more raw materials. It wasn't a fortune, but it was mine. I had built it from nothing. One day, an order came through from a buyer in the city. It wasn't for a small piece. It was a commission request for a larger sculpture, based on a photo they'd seen on my fledgling website. The name on the request was familiar. It was for a new office building being developed by Peterson Development, the same company that had tried to buy the foundry for scrap. And the contact person for the commission, the art consultant for the project, was Daniel Croft. Julien Croftesson. The fight had come to me. They didn't know who I was. They didn't know the connection. They just saw a new artist working in a unique style, using a material they had never seen before. They were trying, unknowingly, to buy a piece of the legacy their family had tried to destroy. I looked at the email for a long time. The old Alara would have been terrified. She would have deleted it, hidden away, afraid of the confrontation. But I wasn't the old Alara anymore. I was a blacksmith's great-granddaughter. I was an artist's daughter. I had spent a winter in the cold and the dark, and I had learned how to make my own light. I took a deep breath, and I began to type my reply. "Thank you for your interest in my work," I wrote. "I will be happy to discuss the commission. However, I only conduct meetings in person. At my workshop." I hit send. The trap was set. It was time for the ghosts of the foundry to finally face the sun. The past wasn't something to be buried or forgotten. It was the foundation I was now building my future on. I was ready. The reflection is the most powerful part of any journey. It's that moment when you look back at the wreckage you started in and realize it wasn't an ending. It was a crucible. It was the fire that was necessary to burn away who you were, so you could become who you were meant to be. My foundry, my father's legacy, wasn't just about metal and art. It was about the alchemy of the human spirit. It was about taking the base elements of pain, betrayal, and loss, and forging them into strength, purpose, and independence. Marcus thought he had taken everything of value from me. He took the money, the apartment, the shared memories. He took the version of myself that was soft and trusting and naive. And I am, in a strange way, grateful. Because what he left me with, what he overlooked, was my real inheritance. He left me with the core of my own strength, a thing I never would have found if he hadn't pushed me into the wilderness. He forced me to find my own resources, to rely on a history I didn't even know I had. He thought he was leaving me with nothing, but he was leaving me with everything that truly mattered. Home isn't four walls and a roof. I learned that standing on the porch of the apartment I'd lost. Home is a sense of purpose. It's the feeling of your hands on a tool that fits them perfectly. It's the smell of your own work, whether that's baking bread, writing code, or in my case, the sharp, clean scent of hot steel. Home is the quiet confidence that comes from knowing that even if it all gets taken away again, you have the skills, the knowledge, and the resilience to build it back up from the ground. The foundry gave me that. My father gave me that. This journey taught me that the sacrifices of our parents are often invisible to us. I grew up thinking my father was distant, emotionally unavailable. I saw his silence as a lack of love. Now I understand that his silence was a shield. It was the heaviest thing he carried. He sacrificed his passion, his art, his very identity to give me a normal life, a life safe from the battles that had nearly destroyed him. The greatest gift I can give him now is to live the life he couldn't. To be the artist, to be the fighter, to bring his work into the light. It's not about vindication or revenge. It's about continuation. It's about picking up a story mid-sentence and writing a new, better ending. And so, as I move forward, I carry these lessons with me. I am building a business, yes, but I am also building a life, one that is authentic and strong, forged in the fire of my past. I am no longer just a girl who lost everything. I am the woman who found herself in the ruins. I am a Foundry keeper, and my work is just beginning. This is the end of this chapter of my story, but I know, for many of you, your own story is still unfolding. You might be in the middle of your own dark Foundry moment right now. If you are, I want you to hold on to this one thought. The most valuable things are often hidden in the places we've been told are worthless. The strength you need is already inside you, waiting for you to pick up the tools and get to work. Thank you for spending this time with me. If this story resonated with you, if it gave you a little bit of hope or strength, please consider subscribing to the channel and becoming a part of this community. We are all just trying to find our way, and it's a little easier when we walk that road together. Leave a comment below and tell me about a time you found unexpected strength. I'll be there, reading and listening. Until next time, be strong, be brave, and keep building.